Hello and welcome to a deck profile for Oracle Think Tank Magus. So this is one of the decks I actually used during BCS season. It was something that made me feel a bit more to be desired, but it's a very fun deck. I actually really enjoyed it. It's just that I think the issue I have with this deck is that it's very top heavy on grade 3s, which is actually a general OTT problem to be fair, but with this I was sort of trying to do too much. So here we've got the history collection engine, which I wanted, but then I also wanted to do Popo because of the later game, because this deck does deck out really fast as opposed to Witches. You do burn really quick, so then that's how Popo came about, just so that I have a way of just kind of going straight in for the kill. And it's also aggressive because of the Magus engine. What Magus engine lets you do is it makes the best use of Momo. Of course, you do have to draw enough cards to actually make it work properly, but it's a good play because it's a good play to have access to because it's also a first stride play, so it means the deck is faster. However, depending on where you're going first or second, it makes what you ride a bit awkward. So hexagonal is what you want to ride as much as possible, but if you ride Facility, it almost feels like you've just lost out on an extra way of drive checking and plussing off of Momo, because once you do Facility enough times, then Momo goes from being a neg to a plus. So here we go with deck profile. 4 copies of Facility Magus. Skill is basically +1, Soul +1. And your Vanguard with Magus in its name gets an extra drive check. And 10k power, which that's the bit I forget about sometimes, but that makes it insane as well. It makes Momo just PG or take, more or less. And if you're not on that though, if you have Ichikishima, then Ichikishima becomes a formidable card as well, because then your opponent actually has to well, they can't use their PGs as easily on Cubic Magus as well. They may just have to use them on Ichikishima more often, but more or less, to kind of go into a bit further, we have 3 Hexagonal Maguses. So Hexagonal Magus, it's there so you can ride up and plus at the same time, so that you can find more Magus cards, and you can stride on top of her, because Pentagonal Magus doesn't do anything if you stride on top. But obviously, if you're playing Pentagonal Magus, then that kind of contradicts a bit of the point of playing Susanoo. So you could, if you want to go Pentagonal instead of Susanoo Hexagonal, but the problem is with Pentagonal Magus is that that card is really neggy. Like, it loses so many cards, and there's too much setup to even make it strong in the first place. So it's a very net zero card, and you're committing a lot to board if you want to do the Cubic Magus play. So it's got quite a bit of downsides as well. It's also not giving you Generation Break either, which means the Meg Calling matchup then can stop you from using Ichikishima. But then you're not as susceptible either, because you got Momo, and Momo works a lot better in this deck than it does in other decks. Then there are 2 copies of Popo for the late game, just so that when you get into deck out, because it burns fast. When you're playing Momo and Facility Magus, Momo basically does 3 drive checks and then 1, but when you've got Facility, every time you activate one of them, you're then getting an extra 2 cards dug through your deck. So that's a reason why Popo does end up being helpful. But I think an issue I've had is that Popo doesn't always finish games, because my opponent ends up turning out to still be on low damage, particularly with Shiranui decks running around, which have Protect Gifts and all that stuff. So that's just, yeah, sometimes Protect heavy decks, like Protect based decks, are actually very good against this, because they can sort of keep things at bay, so they never have to go to high damage as easy. I think that's probably a consistent problem I've had with this, is I think Protect matchups are actually the hardest generally. Chaos is quite challenging as well, but it's not as bad as Witches. Witches, I think, do a lot worse against Chaos. Then 3 copies of Susanoo, because you get your Generation Break 2, you're getting 2 Protect Gifts, you're drawing through your deck. You're obviously going to reride a Magus next turn as well, so because you need to use Cubic Magus. Then 4 Rectangle Magus is a good generic card. It gives you early game aggro, because you're stacking your deck with triggers. You're getting 5k for drive checking trigger as well, which is really good. And even in the later game, it does feel like a way to threaten your opponent with some high number powers, because you're generally going to commit your triggers onto Cubic Magus, since that's a resander. But then Rectangle Magus just gains bonus 5ks on the side, and if you get too many crits, then you can allocate some crits to Rectangle as well to make both of them lethal. Or if your opponent's on 5, then, well, they're lethal regardless, but which means the numbers matter more. Hexagonal Magus, actually, the grade 3, also has that same skill, so that's another reason to play it too, is that you're gaining 5k every time you check a trigger, so then it gains power as well. And then otherwise, Cubic Magus has a filter ability, so Cubic Magus can put a Magus card into your soul, and that includes grade 3s as well. So if you were playing pentagonal, it would work with that, but we're not actually making use of grade 3s in this case. However, sometimes you will use Facility Magus as a target because you want to have more other units or boosters and things. So you can maybe just call a spare facility, shove into Soul, call a spare facility. You're not going to spam facility all game because you're going to deck out anyway, and also you're going to run out of CB. Even if Code Magus doesn't always come up, or at least doesn't come up enough. Sometimes there's going to be games where you just don't see the counter charge engine. That does happen. So, and those games get pretty bad when that happens. That's actually a massive weakness for the deck, is when you don't see your counter charge, it's pretty bad. So very nice for kind of filtering. It's a Vanguard and Rearguard skill as well, unlike Rectangle Magus, which only works on Rearguard. So you do need to ride grade 2s. It's actually one of the problems I have with this deck is the fact that I felt like I need to play as many grade 2s as I can, but it wasn't very easy to get myself to play too many grade 2s because there weren't that many options that were appealing to me. You could play some generic cards, but then they're not Magus name, which ends up creating their own problems in themselves as well. So there's all kinds of like issues. Like Diorong was one that I used to play around with, but I never liked it too much because it's an egg 2. When you're calling Diorong, you're then going to call over it again inevitably, which means then you're just negging more, which makes it less appealing. It's more like it almost starts to feel like a Magical Stone Excavation from Yu-Gi-Oh, where you discard 2 cards, get 1 spell card from your graveyard. So that's one thing, but Cubic Magus has this other ability, which is also a Vanguard skill, by the way. It doesn't come up enough because you have to flood your board with Maguses, but you can restand even on grade 2, and you still have your drive check, which is interesting. So Regalia, which is another deck that I've featured a lot on this channel, has the Yggdrasil and Norn early gameplay where you can use Ruijisa, and sometimes you call Seer Yggdrasil, and then you just use Yggdrasil to then call Norn because you happen to have a spare CB, or although more often than not, it's because you actually called grade 1 VAR during turn 1 of the game, so that you can put the equip gauge onto VAR, and then you just get the counter charge and soul charge any such Norn after clearing off your board and replacing with Norn behind your Ruijisa. So normally that's what would happen to get that restand play, but what tends to happen with Regalia is that then I end up with this 20k column, and then it attacks, right? And then you can use Yggdrasil as a booster to get the Norn boost, but then Norn can discard 1 and discard gauge to restand the Ruijisa and give it 10k, so it becomes 20k again. However, every time I've used that, I never get the crit, so I very, very, very rarely ever restand on turn 2 in Regalia because I don't see crits ever. So I have this cool gimmicks which I can do, but then when the time comes, I never get to make use of the critical. But I'd like to get that adrenaline rush one of these days where you just check the crit on turn 2. But Cubic Magus can do the same thing, which it's very fun. That's actually something I really love about this deck, is that option. But riding Cubic Magus also means you have 1 less Cubic Magus in your deck as well, so just be aware of that as well. It is a downside, but that's also why I'm playing Popo, because Popo is an alternative finisher if you can't use Cubic. But Cubic doesn't always finish anyway. Sometimes the power is insufficient because you don't see enough triggers. Or if you can use a Momo as well. If you use a Momo, then you're actually able to turn into a proper finisher. But then you're also relying on a bit of a setup as well. So if things go wrong, it doesn't work out for you. And with Momo, you're basically giving your whole front row 30, so that 30k applies twice on battle. Ichikishima is not actually as good with Cubic, because Cubic, unlike Seer Yggdrasil, is attacking only for 9k base. So there's no like gain 10k after restanding like with Norn, for example. And it's also just not inherently a good number that you're attacking with in the first place, because you're attacking with a 9k rather than a 23k column. So Regalia makes numbers way better than Magus does. Magus kind of has to do all kinds of weird stuff. Like Momo's the easy way of doing it, but obviously you're not doing Ichikishima. But with Ichikishima, you play cards like Will Crane, which is a trial deck card. When you draw, you basically give your front row 10k. Your 2 rear guards 10k, so you can't give it to Vanguard. And then what happens is that then it goes into your soul as well, so you could build soul with it. But it's a bit of a neg, and it's a little bit of hassle. It's not a Magus either, so you are compromising on Magus slots. It does compete for deck space, so really you're relying a bit too much on just checking triggers. To be fair, when doing all this, then there's 2 copies of Administrate Angel. This is a cycle card, so you can try and look for the other card that you need. in the early game if you need to get something else, or like Honley actually, for example. Honley is a reason to use it. In fact, if you want to search for that, you can even search for PGs or cone Maguses. Like look for other Magus cards as well. But obviously you can only do that if you're on grade 1 less. And it's a decent ride target because when you ride it, then you can boost it with something, and then you just go for the stacking play. So you put a bit more early game pressure as well. It's actually part of the reason not to play Semi-Lunar Magus, in fact, because you're not really looking at the you don't have a Magus Vanguard to be able to use the skill to look at top and all that. So that's a downside. But then Semi-Lunar does also have that downside where you're losing your booster as well, so you don't end up being able to hit 4 stacks. So there's always been that issue in addition. Next we have Honley. Honley is just there to basically deal with highly aggressive decks, and that's more or less it. You can remove from play so that you can then replace it with another Magus in its place. Cone Magus, one of the most important cards in the deck, counter charge 2, just for placing it. So your whole deck becomes a lot more playable because you drew Cone Magus. So you can now do a bunch of facility Magus. You can do Momo, you can do rectangle Maguses, just casually just keep counter blasting all the way through. So all your counter blasts become very unconsequential just because you're drawing into Cone Maguses. Then you got Tetra Magus, which is sort of an extra Magus slot, but it's very hard to fit stuff in this deck. It's actually one issue I do have with this deck is that there's so much you want to play, but trying to cram it all in is the challenge because I mean, especially with the top heavy ratio, because there's issues sometimes with finishing games off, and Popo is obviously that kind of wild card, but it's a grade 3, so there's all kinds of awkward stuff about it. Just things to kind of consider, but also if you're against something like Link Joker, Cubic Magus actually becomes kind of dead, so that's actually another reason for Popo, which lets you play without having access to 6 Magus units. Then you got 1 Root Magus as a perfect guard. I think it's good to have 2 perfect guards in general if you're playing a deck like this one, because you're not actually going to be just spamming through so many PGs while playing the game. Especially when you're not on Susanoo. So if you ride Maguses normally, you're just getting 1 Protect Gift, and there are games where you might end up wanting 2 PGs rather than playing with just 1. Then you've got Lozenge Magus as a starter rather than Semi-Lunar, as explained earlier. Then there's 1 counter charge heal over here as well, just so that you can actually counter charge in case you don't see Cone Magus. That's really it. It's just because I've had games where I couldn't see Cone Magus. There's actually 3 grade 3 heals. That's just there for powering up mainly, but the grade 3 attribute is only really good for defending against Oracle Think Tank. That's really it. There's not really much other value besides the early game defense. Then there's the red over trigger, because the reselling is very good. I've won games with that red OT as well in events as well. So definitely good to have. And there's 2 Sentinel crits for 20k shield, and there's 2 of the G-era versions, just to damage check and draw as well. But you can also soul charge for Susanoo. The Sentinel crits are also just a way of being able to get away with dropping as little as possible to guard a single attack. But obviously you want to have PGs, because if you're not playing PGs, you might find attacks that are like 3 cards to drop or more. And then what are you going to do then? So you need to still play a few, but you don't want to have too many PGs either if you can help it. And of course G-Guards do help as well. That Psychic Bird, a bit of a weird one, but I think you do ultimately need it because the deck is very bricky. So having access to Psychic Bird helps. You get Soul Charge, but you also get to draw and then hopefully find a Magus card. And you know, just it's like a mulligan. It's a 1-card mulligan. But obviously it's a 5k crit, which this deck does value 10k crits. The more power your triggers give, the better. So that's a downside that this deck deals with. Then there's 3 Celestia Witch Totos as well for striding, because if you can help it, you'd rather avoid dropping grade 3 to stride. You can drop Susanoo, that's fine. And you may also drop Popo as well sometimes, or Hexagonal, but Facility Magus is the card that you especially want to keep as many copies of, because every single one counts towards a heavier play. And then as for the orders, there's 1 Forbidal, because Forbidal can search for Facility. It's like a 5th copy of Facility Magus. You can also search for Popo as well, but obviously if you call it too early, then you're just going to end up killing it by calling Magus over it. So that's why Hexagonal Magus is also good as a second option, because Hexagonal Magus is another rear guard beater you can call as well that just gets 5k. It's not the best card. It's almost like playing CEO Amaterasu V-Series, where all you're really doing is just gaining 5ks, but it's better than a vanilla. So you're actually you will it will kind of count for something in some games, and then Sanctitude as well. In addition, but also Hexagonal. Sorry, Hexagonal is also Magus name, which is another key part, and you have to call two different names of Orbital. And Sanctitude because of one card drop PG as well. But again, it does feel a bit top heavy when you're playing orders as well as all these grade 3s, because your riding becomes a bit more sensitive. And as you can see here, the grade 1 count isn't very good. It's 9 grade 1s. But that's also part of the reason why I administrate Angels there as well, to try and maybe offload a bit. But problem is that the timing of it is not the best, because if you use that card, you're then also missing out your G assist. So you have to do your G assist before you use that. So it's not the greatest of choices. But since I haven't made this deck profile since late last year, because I was very busy and things and stuff came up, obviously the deck in general wouldn't change in principle, but because of the lack of releases. But I might have a second look at this since some months have passed. I do like coming back to Magus time to time again. I find this deck very fun to deck build with. And I think I was a bit biased around the time because I really wanted to play with the new promos. So I don't know how much bias was in play with that, but and maybe History Collection. Maybe I just really want to play History Collection. I'm not really sure, to be honest. But yeah, interesting stuff to kind of look back at time to time, because I played it back in France as well, like years back before the pandemic, and I had very different lists back then. As for the G Zone, 2 Kirin because of History Collection reasons, Harmonics Messiah just for the free order, of course, and then you've got 1 Octagon Magus as a G Guard, because you may know the top card of your deck because you've done another G Guard beforehand, or you may have used Administrate Angel as well. So by knowing what the top card is, you get your 30k shield, which is good, and you're drawing 1. Dragon King, because Dragon King can also help you set up a board. So if you're lacking any Magus units, but you can't do like Momo plays, maybe Momo just doesn't work in that turn because you don't have the hand for Momo to do facility makes and all that stuff, or even for example, if you can't trigger Ichikishima's Oral Condition, that's another reason for Dragon King. Dragon King's sort of like your alternate if you just can't do Momo or Ichikishima. 2 Bavrois, because Bavrois is also a draw G Guard as well, and it can stack as well. Look at top card, put top or bottom. 4 copies of Ichikishima, because of guard restrict plays, having access to that is always handy to have, and it also draws 2. 2 Amaterasu, it's a free G Guardian because there's no Count Blast. Big shield, and it's all charges. 1 Dismal to protect your Cubic Maguses and potentially your Popos as well. And that's more or less it for the deck profile. Hope you enjoyed, and I will see you guys next time. Bye.